What if one person quietly changed how Britain eats and even how it relaxes? Not through politics, not through protest, but through everyday life. Because sometimes the biggest changes are the ones we stop noticing. I want you to picture someone in London in the early 1800s. They step into a dining room. The smells are unfamiliar. The flavours are new. The experience feels different from anything they've tried before. This isn't traditional British food. And behind it is a man named Sheikh Din Mohammed. At first glance, it might not seem like history, just a meal, just a business. But moments like this are where culture shifts. Sheikh Din Mohammed was born in India in the mid-18th century. He grew up during a time of expanding British influence in the subcontinent, eventually working with the East India Company. But his story doesn't stay there. He travelled to Britain, settled, and began building a life in a country that was still figuring out what to do with influences from beyond Europe. And instead of staying on the margins, he introduced something new into everyday British life. In 1810, Mohammed opened what is often described as Britain's first Indian restaurant, the Hindustan Cafe House in London. It didn't last long commercially, but that's not the point. The point is, it existed. It introduced British diners to a different cuisine, a different way of eating, a different set of expectations around food. And even though the business itself struggled, the idea didn't disappear. Because once people encounter something new, it doesn't just vanish, it lingers. After the restaurant closed, Mohammed didn't give up. Instead, he adapted. He moved to Brighton and opened something very different, a bathhouse offering what he called shampooing. Now, this wasn't shampoo as we think of it today. It was a form of therapeutic massage combined with steam baths, inspired by Indian practices. And it became popular, very popular. So popular that he was eventually appointed shampooing surgeon to the royal court. This is where Mohammed's influence becomes really interesting. He didn't change laws, he didn't leave movements, he didn't reshape institutions. He changed habits. Food, hygiene, leisure. These are things people experience daily, often without thinking about their origins. But they matter because culture isn't just built in Parliament or on battlefields, it's built in kitchens, in routines, and in small repeated actions. And Mohammed played a role in shifting those patterns. When we think about influence, we often focus on dramatic moments, wars, reforms, revolutions, but cultural change is often quieter. It happens when something unfamiliar becomes familiar, when something foreign becomes normal, when something new becomes part of everyday life. Mohammed's work sits right in that space. He introduced ideas that didn't immediately transform Britain, but gradually became part of it. Let me pause here and ask you something. Think about something you eat or use regularly today that didn't originate in Britain. How often do you actually think about where it came from? Pop in the comments. I'd love to hear what people came up with. Because this is how cultural change works. Slowly, subtly, and often without us noticing. Despite his success, Mohammed isn't widely remembered. His restaurants closed. His bathhouse eventually faded. His name doesn't appear as often as others in the story of Britain, but his influence didn't disappear because the things he helped introduce, new foods, new practices, new ways of thinking about daily life continued to spread. And over time, they became part of what people simply think of as normal. Mohammed's legacy isn't tied to a single event or a specific law. It's woven into everyday life, into the way Britain eats, the way it relaxes, the way it adopts ideas from elsewhere and makes them its own. And that kind of legacy is easy to miss because once something becomes normal, we stop asking where it came from. So what does Sheikh bin Mohammed's story tell us about the making of Britain? It tells us that influence doesn't always arrive with force or visibility. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through experience, through habit, through repetition. Mohammed didn't transform Britain overnight, but he contributed to a gradual shift in its culture, one that continues to shape everyday life. So how much of what we think of as British actually came from somewhere else and simply became familiar over time? Thanks for walking a little further along the path that made Britain. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that, and I'd appreciate a click, it really helps. If you subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue of videos like this for you to discover, including this one, chosen especially for you by YouTube. Have a look, I think you'll like it. So until next time, thank you so much, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.